Welcome to the Legacy Leadership Podcast, where we help Christian founder-led nonprofits get funded so that you can lead well, live whole, and leave a legacy. This week, I want to talk to you about a book that I just finished reading recently. It's called The Gifts of Imperfection by Brené Brown. I'm going to start doing some book reviews of different books as I read them. I like to read quite a bit. So I'm going to go through books as I read them and share some insights, but I also want to specifically dig into what do those books have as takeaways for us around fundraising? How do the principles apply to building relationships, creating connections, being able to raise money for our organizations, and ultimately being able to show up well as leaders to be able to make those connections and accomplish the missions that God has given us? I'm going to go through books as I read them. I'm also going to go back through my library of books and pull out some of my favorite ones and share information on those, really looking at it again through the framing of fundraising. I think will be really fun to share my own personal journey, some of the different lessons that I've learned through these books, and how they apply to different principles that I teach and share about fundraising. So this book, The Gifts of Imperfection, I've kind of thumbed some different parts of this book. I'm going to walk through, maybe if there's some other insights that pop out to me. The overall message of this book is talking about wholehearted living from this place of worthiness. And I know, at least for myself, I have often struggled with that feeling that I'm not enough, that no matter what I do, what I say, what I accomplish, it's not going to be enough. I need to earn my acceptance. I need to work harder, do more, help more people. I need to be who I think everybody else wants me to be. I need to be the one to rescue everybody else or be there for everybody else or work hard to gain approval. And this book talks a lot about how do we live in that place of worthiness, recognizing that we aren't perfect, we are imperfect, and that ultimately that is what brings out courage and compassion and connection. That those being the three gifts of imperfection that Brené Brown talks about are courage, compassion, and connection. That when we can live in our imperfection, when we can love ourselves, accept ourselves, that we can really step into this wholehearted living that she talks about, that it allows us to cultivate courage. It allows us to truly have compassion for other people, to be able to connect with them in this compassionate way that's very authentic and honest and vulnerable, and really being able to be there for people in the way that they need us to be there for them, and then ultimately to be able to have connection. And I think that's what so many of us long for in our lives, is connection with other people. And I know when it comes to fundraising that ultimately I share often that the number one thing that brings in effective and long-lasting fundraising is relationships. Really, it's all about relationships when we talk about fundraising. And so understanding these gifts of imperfection helps us to create connections. And then through those connections, that's how we can really effectively create long-lasting fundraising. How we can ultimately create that stable funding for our organization is built through connection with other people. So I'm just going to run through some tabs that I have in this book, some things that stood out to me, some things that I really liked. Maybe I'll jump in on some highlights. I just kind of got some tabs about 15 minutes before I hopped on the podcast. I don't want to pre-plan too much. I love to be able to just share what's coming up in my mind. I may look through a page and you may hear me pause, and that's okay. You can just go through this process with me and I'll be able to share it with you. So this first part here, it's talking about courage and compassion and connection, that when we have, that's how we ultimately cultivate worthiness. And I love this idea of courage. She talks about how it's through the doing that we get what it is that we're looking for. And this is actually something a friend of mine talked about at one of her recent events that I was at, is that our identity becomes whatever it is through the actual doing of it. And so Brené Brown talks about, she says, you learn courage by couraging. And the same is true for compassion and connection. that the key word here is practice. Courage is like a habitus, a habit or a virtue. You get it by courageous acts. You learn to swim by swimming. You learn to courage by couraging. The same is true for compassion and connection. We invite compassion into our lives when we act compassionately towards ourselves and others. We feel connected in our lives when we reach out and connect. And so I like this idea. My friend Summer, I was at an event with her about a month ago, and she talked about Moses. And she said Moses never had performed a miracle until he did. It wasn't until he performed his first miracle that he was somebody who performed miracles. The identity came as he was doing it. And I think that applies to us as fundraisers, that we have this idea of, I haven't done it before, or I've never raised $10,000. I've never gotten the $50,000 check. I've never had a large donor. And that comes as we do. It becomes as we go out and we talk and we invite people in and we invite them to be part of things. That's how we become good fundraisers. That's how we become the people who can say, I've gotten a $50,000 check or a $20,000 check, or I've had 100 large donors who give more than $500 every single month. It's through the doing that we gain that identity. The other example that I thought of in my world recently was in writing my book, that I was not an author until I actually started writing. Once I started writing my book, then I all of a sudden became a writer. And then when I published my book, I became an author. And it wasn't until I actually published that I was a published author. And so it's in that doing that we become. And so all of these gifts of imperfection, courage and compassion and connection, we cultivate them by doing, not just by thinking about it or not just by desiring it or wanting it, that there's action, there's practice. We have to put things into practice to get there. And it's not going to be perfect in the beginning. And that's totally fine. So I'm going to flip over to this section about connection, and Brené Brown describes connection as the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued. And I thought that was really powerful. Later on in this page, she says, connection begets connection. But I thought it was really powerful where it talks about the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued. And if we want to be good fundraisers, if we want to be able to build good relationships, then we need to make sure that we are seeing, hearing, and valuing the people that we're communicating with. Oftentimes, we tend to approach fundraising from a one-sided perspective. You have something and I want it. You have money and I need that to be able to accomplish my mission. And that's not true connection. That's not really a relationship. A relationship starts by seeing, hearing, and valuing the other person. That if we really want to build a relationship, if we want to build partners, if we want this long lasting, sustaining fundraising, then we need to learn to connect. And connecting, again, it's seeing people, hearing people, valuing people. And a lot of that is understanding, how do you ask good questions? How do you become an active listener? How do you connect with other people? And so when I go out and I fundraise and I am looking to create partnerships, it's not about me just getting. A lot of it is about me giving. A lot of it is about me connecting. I love to ask people about their lives. I love to learn about what they're passionate about. I love to listen to other people and have them talk about what's going on in their lives, the real stuff, not just, what did you do this weekend, but to be able to really truly connect, to feel and see and hear and value the other people. That until I can help people feel seen, heard, and valued, I'm not going to be able to create a true partnership. And so I really liked that idea and definition of connection. Let's see here. I highlighted this other part. Oh, this talks about fitting in versus belonging. And this was a really, really powerful concept for me as I was reading through the book. Brené Brown talks about this idea of the difference between fitting in and belonging. And I think oftentimes we have this desire for belonging, but we actually are just trying to fit in. And that nervous energy of fitting in actually hinders our fundraising. It hinders our connection. And she says, fitting in is about assessing a situation and becoming who you need to be accepted. Belonging, on the other hand, doesn't require us to change who we are, it requires us to be who we are. And I think so often in fundraising, we try to fit in. We try to fit in with this crowd or fit in with that crowd. We feel like if we fit in with the people who have the money, that they're going to like us, that they're going to give us money. We try to become what we think they want us to be in order for them to write the check. And really, that's not authentic. That's not really connecting. That is actually living out of integrity. And I think for so many of us as leaders in the nonprofit space, we want to live from a place of integrity. When we're not living in integrity with ourselves, it's exhausting. It's so hard to keep that up. And I think that's why a lot of times we end up burning ourselves out is we're always trying to be somebody that we're not in order to connect with people so that they will fund our mission. And I think, belonging is so much more powerful. Belonging is not about changing who we are. It's about being who we are. It's about finding our tribe, our people, finding those people that we want to connect with, that we want to partner with. And the reality is the people that are going to be our true partners, that are going to be in relationship with us, that are going to invest with us in the mission that God has given us, those are the people where we can find belonging. They don't want us to change. They want us to be who we are. And that's how we create that sense of belonging. That's how we create honest and authentic fundraising is through those connections with our people. If you feel like you need to become somebody different in order to get money from somebody, that's just manipulation. That's not real connection. And ultimately, that's not sustainable fundraising. If you need to live out of integrity, then that's not the kind of fundraising that we want to look like, that we want to look for. A couple pages later here, Brené Brown says, practicing self love means learning how to trust ourselves, to treat ourselves with respect, and to be kind and affectionate towards ourselves. And I wrote my own little note here. Loving myself means talking kind about myself, encouraging myself, accepting and affirming who I am. And that ultimately, in order to find belonging, we need self acceptance. If we are not comfortable being who we truly are, then we're not going to be able to really find our people, to really be able to belong. And ultimately, that's much more what we want than fitting in. But in order to find belonging, we have to practice self acceptance. And I just like this thought that I had that, we have to talk kind to ourselves. I had a friend of mine that I was talking with recently, and she was talking about how often we talk negatively about ourselves. We say things about ourselves that we would never say about somebody else. And thinking about, especially those of us as Christians, we think about being kind to other people, that this is God's son or God's daughter, and how dare I ever say this mean and nasty thing about somebody else, but then we turn around and say it about ourselves. And that if we truly are sons and daughters of God, why in the world would we talk that way about ourselves? Why would we be saying, I'm stupid, or I just can't do it, or I'm not enough, or, all these other nasty, mean things that we say to ourselves? They're all the opposite of self-acceptance. They're putting ourselves down, beating ourselves up. I'm never going to be good enough. I'll never be able to achieve. I'm dumb. I'm stupid. I'm not smart enough. And sometimes we just say those in jest, right? We're like, we make a mistake and we're like, oh man, I'm so stupid. And we just say it kind of off the cuff, but I would never look at somebody else and say, oh my gosh, you're so stupid. Like that would just be horrible. So why would we be saying that about ourselves? That self-acceptance, it's so important to be talking kindly to ourselves. I highlighted this spot in the book. Again, I just have a lot of these one-liners. When I go through and I read a book, I write in the margins a lot. I underline things. I'm writing notes to myself. I'm highlighting. And so just as I'm flipping through the pages here, This one jumped out again. Incongruent living is exhausting. And I think that's what I was talking about with being in integrity with ourselves, is that when we are living incongruent, when we are not living in integrity with who we are, who we know that God's created us to be, it's exhausting. It's exhausting trying to be somebody else all the time. And so when it comes to fundraising and doing it in a sustainable way, let's do it with integrity. Let's be ourselves. Let's show up authentic and honest and vulnerable. And we don't have to be anything else. We don't need to fit in with people that aren't our people and pretend to be something different. If people can't accept you for who you are and don't want you to be who you are, then we don't want their money. Those aren't your kind of people. It's not worth any amount of money to receive for your mission to be living out of integrity with yourself or out of integrity with who you know God has created you to be. All right, moving on. Authenticity. Here's another excerpt. It says, authenticity is a collection of choices that we have to make every day. It's about the choice to show up and to be real, the choice to be honest, the choice to let our true selves be seen. And to be authentic in a culture that wants you to fit in and people please. I think we do have a culture that talks a lot about fitting in, that we have to wear the right clothes and we have to show up the right way and we have to use these words and not those words, that we stand tall, bigger of our shoulders, all these different things and ways of fitting in. You got to have the right car and you got to have the right hairstyle, and if you're showing up in the wrong place with the wrong clothes, and all of those things, they are important to some extent, and I don't want to downplay being able to show up in a way that is presentable, to be able to understand what perception means, that we only have a limited amount of first interactions with people. That first interaction matters, the first impression matters. And so it's not that we just want to walk around being a slob all the time, but we should be showing up authentic, and it is about showing up, being real, being honest, and letting your true self be seen. That's ultimately what creates the connections that we're looking for. Going a little bit later on here in the book, it's talking about scarcity, and I think that's a big thing that comes up in our fundraising. It's a big limiting belief that holds us back from asking, is this scarcity mindset, scarcity versus abundance. And we can get into this feeling of like, there's not enough resources to go around, or what if I don't have all the money? How am I going to pay the bills? How am I going to help the people? And it's a very real feeling. I remember the overwhelm that I used to feel in running an organization with thousands of children that were coming to our school, hundreds of employees that were working for me, and that if I didn't have the money, those children weren't going to be fed, those employees weren't going to be able to provide for their families, and the pressure that was there all the time was immense pressure. And so if that's you, I can relate to what that feels like, and I can understand the fear that can exist, that it keeps you just stuck in this different place. And so that's why I highlighted this spot, or I underlined this spot in the book, that it says the opposite of fear is joy. And so the opposite of fear is actually being joyful. And so when we are in fear, it actually steals our joy. We're not able to show up joyful. We're missing out on the joy that we should be experiencing in life when we're living out of fear. And I thought that was really interesting. And yeah, it talks about, let me see here, where am I going? I don't know where I started with this. That's fine. I lost my spot. But yeah, it talked about fear being the opposite of joy. And so, as we are thinking about our fundraising, and we're thinking about running our organizations, and we're thinking about going after things, in my one-on-one coaching that I have with people, I talk about emotions, and I talk about the importance of how you show up. The state that you show up will dictate a lot of the results that you get in life. And so I talk with my clients about the expression of anger and fear and sadness and joy and happiness and connection. And one of the comparisons that I make is between fear and joy. And neither of those emotions are good or bad in and of themselves. Our emotions just are. We are designed by God to be able to experience emotions. God gave us emotions to be able to experience life, to be able to connect with others, to be able to create, and to keep us safe, to keep us connected to what we're supposed to have in life. And so it's not that fear is bad. There are times when fear is really good. Fear keeps us from running and jumping off a cliff. Fear keeps us from standing in a fire. Fear keeps us from doing dangerous things. Fear protects us from bad people and causes us to set boundaries. Joy allows us to be open and expressive and experience and allow people in and allow things to come to us. They're both of them are good. We need them in different times of our life, in different seasons and in different situations. But when we try to approach a situation that requires joy and we approach it with fear, it actually closes us off to opportunities. Fear is a very constrictive and limiting emotion. When we feel fear, it's a very protective. We close ourselves off, we wall ourselves up, and it's very closed off kind of energy. And so oftentimes when we approach our fundraising from fear, we're actually closing off all opportunity. We're keeping people at an arm's length because we're operating from a place of fear versus operating from joy, fundraising from joy. It's a very open and expansive energy. It's open to possibilities. It's open to connection. It's open to working with other people. And so when we approach fundraising and we're looking to connect with other people, it's really important that we're connecting with that right state, that we're connecting out of joy and not fear. Another opposite that she made a comparison of later on in the book is the opposite of play. And she talked about the importance of play in being able to be courageous and to connect and to be able to have that wholehearted living, and that it is that it's important to be able to play. And I found this interesting in this comparison. She says the opposite of work, or the opposite of play, is not work. The opposite of play is depression. Depression. So interesting that I think, in my ministry life, when I was running my own organization and doing all this work in different places, depression would creep in so easily. And it's interesting looking back that I think that was in the times where I was overworking myself. I wasn't taking time to play. I wasn't taking time to connect and do things that I enjoy doing. And I think for so many of us, we just get so caught up in doing the work and doing the ministry, and we forget how important it is to be able to play, to be able to enjoy life, to be able to do those other things. It looks like I have two more tabs here that I'm going to share. She talks about overcoming self-doubt. Ooh, wow, self-doubt. Big limiting belief when it comes to fundraising. So she says overcoming self-doubt is all about believing we're enough and letting go of what the world says we're supposed to be and supposed to call ourselves. I'm going to read that one more time because that is really, really powerful. Overcoming self-doubt is all about believing we're enough and letting go of what the world says we're supposed to be and supposed to call ourselves. That's huge. And I think it's that letting go that really feeds into our fundraising. That self-doubt is one of those things that it's a limiting belief that keeps us back in our fundraising, that keeps us from connecting to other people and asking other people. That idea of I'm not enough, I doubt myself, can I do this? Did God really call me to this? I'm not enough. All of those feelings that are there, that imposter syndrome, and you don't have the skill set and you don't know what you're doing. These are all self-doubt things. And Brené Brown is saying that we have to let go of who the world says we're supposed to be or what we're supposed to call ourselves. That it's not about that fitting in, it's about being who we truly have been called to be. And the last piece that I had underlined here that I wanted to share is that meaningful change is a process. We don't change overnight. I often tell my clients that the first step to changing is awareness. We have to become aware of the places where we're stuck. We have to become aware of the problem. We have to become aware of the things that need to change. That if we're not aware, then there's nothing we can do about it. And so awareness is the first step. And then from there, it's a process to change. We don't just think and all of a sudden we're different. We don't just set an intention and all of a sudden arrive. It's a process to be able to get there. And so I want to encourage you to be patient with yourself, even as you're learning to fundraise, as you might be early stages of running your organization. Maybe you've been running your organization for a really long time and you feel like you're still not quite where you want to be. You're probably a visionary who has a bigger, broader vision, wants to accomplish more than you've already accomplished. And just remember that it's a process. It's not something that happens overnight. Be patient with yourself. And as I always say, lead well, live whole, and leave a legacy.